I'm just a fan, and I'm here today to talk about Finding Dory. And look, I found Finding Dory. I find Finding Dory to be a fine movie, although I find Finding Nemo to be a finer movie. Who founded Finding Dory? Did the founders of Finding Dory find they did a good job? Did the founders of Finding Dory found Finding Nemo as well? Dang it, I just found out. I didn't find Finding Dory, I found Finding Nemo. I mean, I didn't found Finding Nemo, the founders of Finding Nemo found Finding Nemo. Are you finding this hard to follow? You know, foundationally speaking, founding both Finding Nemo and Finding Dory finds foundational... Whoa, okay, just stop right there, please. I like Finding Dory quite a bit, and I really have to consider it in the context of being a Finding Nemo sequel, so I'm going to really reference Finding Nemo a lot and compare the two movies, because you really couldn't have Finding Dory without Finding Nemo. We live, again, in a very strange age of film, and in this particular case, I would like to point out how strange it is that we have so many movies where there's big gaps between prequels and sequels, or originals and remakes, and here we are again finding ourselves with a new Star Wars Episode 7 movie, and 8's come out by now. There was Terminator 5, where they incorporated things, direct scenes from the first Terminator from 1984, I think is the year. There's going to be Incredibles 2, with 14 years between those movies, and even things like Jurassic World. I mean, it's been, I don't know, it was 1993 for Jurassic Park 1, so almost 20 years later. I mean, gosh, what's going on here? There's so many weird instances of just, let's bring back the past, and I guess some people out there often say Hollywood just doesn't have any more ideas. I'm not really here to try to tackle those kinds of big questions. That's way too much for just a fan to handle. Let's just talk about Finding Dory and how pretty good it is. If you haven't seen Finding Dory yet for some reason, like I hadn't until recently, make sure you don't watch this review or any review into the spoiler section. For me, that'll be this time right here. So make sure you stop the video or pause it by then, because after that, all fair game spoiler things are going to happen. Now, I want to begin the review with a very important question that I think might be one of the most important questions to ask a reviewer, or for a reviewer to ask others, which is, how do you compare Finding Nemo, Finding Dory? Is there a difference? Is there a balance? Is there equality here? What's the better movie? If I loved Finding Nemo, am I going to go into Finding Dory finding as much finding? Am I going to go into Finding Dory having the same experience and coming out of it feeling just as good as my heart felt after watching Finding Nemo? Well, it depends on the person, of course. But for my opinion, I do think that Finding Nemo is clearly the better movie. And when I say clearly the better one, I want to be clear about this. I'm not trying to measure how much better it is. To me, it's arbitrary how much room is in between Finding Nemo and Finding Dory. But I do think it's clear, it's obvious, it's not a question to me, that Finding Nemo is the better movie. And there's a few reasons for this. Some of them are more spoiler-related, and some of them are more basic-related. For example, I think that when Finding Nemo came out, it's almost like a happy accident how good it was. And it's amazing how, when you think about it, it has kind of a linear plot. You have Nemo, who's lost, and you have Marlon, his dad, trying to find him, and that's most of the movie. I mean, it's the vast majority of the movie is him on the journey to find Nemo. And of course, in this case, it's a lot about the journey itself, you know, the people he meets, the support he gets, as well as for Nemo, the personal support he gets, the social groups he creates, and the personal growth that he has. So, of course, we have other great things going on here. And so when you think about Finding Dory in the same sense, and I think this is in the trailer, so I'm pretty sure it's not a spoiler, but Dory's looking for her parents for most of Finding Dory. So once again, we have someone searching for someone else, or in this case, someone's else, and there's still things that go on in between. There's still characters that Dory meets, there's still other things that happen in terms of the journey is the most important part, but I do feel like the magic and the charm, I guess charm's a good word to use here, the charm of Finding Nemo was much more charming than Finding Dory. And this could be for a couple of reasons. For one thing, it could just be that Finding Nemo is the better movie, and we can see that, or I can see that. But I think it's also potentially because Finding Nemo was the first movie of its kind, mostly, I think, where we got to see something like this happen with a Pixar animated movie. And now that we have Finding Dory, it's not the first time we've seen this. It kind of loses some charm, I think, just by default, because, yeah, it's the character looking for their parents, or looking for their child, or looking for something, and it doesn't really hold the same kind of jarringly awesome effect into our hearts as it might have with Finding Nemo. Now, that's just the way I'm interpreting the situation, and of course anybody else out there might realize that, yeah, Finding Dory, that was way more jarringly positive to my heart and soul. So that's just the way I see it. But I do think, in terms of comparison, Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, we have a bit of a clear difference, and again, it's really irrelevant to me how much that difference is, because I like both movies quite a bit, actually. Finding Dory did a good job recreating some of the same aspects and elements of Finding Nemo, but I'm glad they didn't rehash it in a way where it felt old or felt, not refreshing enough. It was pretty good, and I want to start by saying the music in particular. I'm glad they didn't use a lot of the same music, and especially in the same ways. When they did use the same music in Finding Dory as they did in Finding Nemo, it was at the right moment, and I'm really glad they thought that through. You could tell that when you heard some original score, original soundtrack from Finding Nemo, it was at that right time to give you that nostalgia for the movie that was 14, 15, 16 years ago, and to appreciate how the characters have changed from where they were, how we knew them so long ago, to how we see them now. That, in particular, the music I thought was good. The music itself, though, in terms of contained within Finding Dory, it wasn't bad, but it certainly could have used some more charm itself, because whether different or the same, you still want to have good music in your Pixar movie, which Nemo had excellent music, and I still love that soundtrack to this day. Finding Dory, in terms of its own self-contained movie, not comparing it to Finding Nemo, it lacked a little bit in that sense, but the music did still worked when it counted. Now, regarding the linear plotline we sort of saw with Finding Nemo, and the similar linear plotline we saw with Finding Dory, I did find myself thinking that the Finding Dory plotline was a little more repetitive in terms of what ended up happening throughout that plotline. I think on 3, 4, or 5, or 6 occasions even, I found myself thinking, oh, again? That happened again? And this again? So maybe for Finding Dory, maybe they had trouble keeping it as fresh as they did in Finding Nemo. I mean, in Finding Nemo, we have a lot of things going on. There's your, sharks, there's your really deep in the ocean with the lanternfish thing with the sharp teeth, there's the seagulls. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in Finding Nemo that it had a great variety, I guess I would say, and the variety in Finding Dory just may not have been as deep as Finding Nemo, which is okay. It's not like the movie should be judged on how many different situations or instances do the characters have to go through to get from point A to point Z, but it did keep it more enjoyable and more refreshing, and it kept you in the movie for Finding Nemo, unlike in Finding Dory when I was almost kicked out a bit. Not entirely, but a little bit of a, ugh, again, alright. Let's talk characters and about how adorable, or adorable, I'm sure I'm the first person to use that joke, Dory is as a young fish. I fell in love with that character, that image of her character and how she acted, how she thought, how she talked, and how she interacted with her parents. I really enjoyed that. I can see how some people, especially for an animated movie, don't enjoy so much of a really young character with a high-pitched voice that's very childish, but in this case, it worked really well for me. So I like that character, and in terms of other characters in the movie, the main characters and supporting characters, I liked almost all of them, except for one. And I'm not going to say who that is or why right now. There's one character that kind of bugged me throughout this movie, but most of the rest were just fine. And again, back to Finding Nemo and comparisons, I do think that some of the Finding Nemo characters, those quick ones we got 1 or 2 scenes with that just kind of point our characters in the right direction, those are good characters, and we do need those in movies to help the plot move and keep it fresh in a way of it's not just the same exact thing, the same exact person over and over, leading the characters to the next spot in the story. Some movies can do that. In Finding Dory, we have characters who help our main characters, which is what you need in a movie like this, but they just didn't have the same, I keep going back to the word charm, they didn't have the same charm as the ones in Finding Nemo did, and I can't really say why that is, because it was the same type of thing in terms of what they were there to do. They're there to help our main characters. They make friends and they, find someone who says, can you help me with this? And, oh yeah, you need to do this now. That happened in Finding Nemo too, and for some reason it just didn't work as well. But in terms of the main characters and supporting, except that one, it did have it where it counted in terms of characters. So you're not gonna, if you haven't seen the movie yet, you're not gonna go into it probably hating it or being like, who the heck is this person and why are they doing this? It's gonna work. It does work in terms of the characters, their motivations, what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, and I do like that aspect of the movie Finding Dory. I hate to bring up Star Wars all the time, but I keep coming back to this thought in my mind of, we have this huge, or seemingly huge, controversy of, why is Episode 7 and The Force Awakens have to be so similar to Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope? I mean, there's reasons for that, reasons against that, and I'm not even going to say anything about which one of those makes more or less sense. But in terms of, if someone were to look at Finding Dory and say, well, is this going to be the exact same movie as Finding Nemo? Why should I even bother? I think you should bother. At least the characterization of the main characters in Finding Nemo is important, and it's different than the important characterization of the characters in Finding Dory. That sounded really confusing when I said it out loud. But in terms of Finding Nemo, we have Marlon trying to learn how to be a dad. He, had this horrible traumatic experience when they had with oh gosh, what's her name in English? Coral. So, okay, full disclosure, I don't even own this movie in English. I mean, fun fact, actually, when you buy a movie that was originally made in English in Germany, you get the movie both in German and in English. So for German speakers like me, that's awesome. But I haven't seen the movie in English in long time. I've seen the movie, the last 10 times I've seen the movie has been in German, so I apologize if I have different names for some of these characters, because sometimes they do change for whatever reason. What was I saying? Oh my gosh. So Marlon, right? So Marlon's the dad, and Cora is her name in German, but Coral, I think, in English, where they had the traumatic experience, and he's trying to learn how to deal with that, deal with being a dad, and deal with being able to give independency to his son Nemo. And Nemo has to worry a little bit about, growing up himself, which is more basic. It's almost even more about a character movie of Marlon, I guess, or sort of. It's them together. But Nemo has to learn how to grow up a little bit, be independent, and even though he can be independent, this is like the best part about the movie, even though he can be independent, he also still learns that he can appreciate the things his dad tries to do for him, and it's really about how they connect rather than how they're different. That's great. I mean, that's the best way to do these kinds of movies. So in Finding Dory, it's not just that again. That's my original point here. You don't see the exact same way, the exact same motivations for the characters, and even better, like on top of that, cherry on top or icing on top of that cake, it's in addition to that. We've already seen Marlon and Nemo and Dory interact together in Finding Nemo, and now we get to see further on that. We're building upon it. It's not like it's a side story necessarily. I don't think it is. I almost felt like it could have been when I was watching the movie, but it really isn't. It really builds on that. What we've already seen, what we've already learned, let's take it a few steps further and make it about this as well and this instead. So that was a big, long way for me to say, I like the motivations behind the characters in the movie, I like how they act upon those motivations, and I kind of like where it takes them in the movie. It's pretty cool. Let's see, are there other non-spoiler things I gotta talk about before spoilers start? We talked about characters, we talked about the motivations of the characters, the plot lines, and the music a little bit. How about humor? Humor's good because humor has always been an important part of any Pixar movie out there. And once again, I do think that Finding Nemo outperformed Finding Dory in terms of humor and the cleverness of the humor. At least to this day, I still watch Finding Nemo and laugh at it and say I like that part. And when I watched Finding Dory, I laughed a good few times. But it might just be me, and I hate to admit it, but I do think that in this, here's an example, in this 16, 17-year gap we've had between Finding Nemo and Finding Dory, humor in animated movies seems to have changed. It always seems to be these days that it's really fast-paced, and it's almost as if they don't think the audience can hold the attention on the characters, and they have to make it so funny so quickly because they're going to lose us somehow. That's kind of what it feels like, and I can't imagine that's really really what film creators are trying to do. But as I watch movies these days, animated movies like Finding Dory, there's a lot of things where it's just like, that's not as clever as it used to be. It's a little more, I've been saying this a lot recently, it's a little more one-dimensional, maybe less mature, and even if Finding Dory is funny, I didn't find it to be quite as clever. I think clever is the best word to use here, as Finding Nemo was. So if you're looking for a lot of laughs and you haven't seen the movie yet and you're going in being like, I'm so ready to chuckle my head off, maybe you will, and because you can never tell somebody else what they're going to find funny, I just personally didn't, and it's still not spoilery to say that it's not quite as funny as Finding Nemo. I will say in terms of good heart, though, because it doesn't have to be funny, it's not all about the humor. In terms of good heart, I'd say that's probably the closest thing, I guess, when I think about it. The closest thing that does compare to Finding Nemo with Finding Dory is the heart and again, back to character motivation, where the characters want to go, where they start from, and why they're on their journey, and how they feel as they're going on that journey. That's the most important thing too, probably. That's probably the most equivalent thing that Finding Dory has to Finding Nemo in terms of how they were made. I felt for what was going on there, and that's what the viewer is supposed to do. If the viewer, is able to engage themselves and really care about what's going on with the characters and stuff like that, then the movie did its job. So does Finding Dory do its job? Pretty much, yes. And I think that's probably a pretty good place to start the spoiler section, so please don't spoil this movie for yourself. Go into it, especially... I wish I could say a spoiler to show you why it's a good one to not spoil for yourself, but of course that doesn't work. I'm sure that's never happened to anyone before. But go see the movie if you haven't. As of at least right now, or recently, it's still on Netflix, so get out there, watch it, and if you're waiting for me to start the dang spoiler section because you've already seen it, I apologize. Let's hit it. Spoilers! Finding Dory. I think I should start by saying this. It's hard to know where to start when you get to talk about spoilers now, but I really enjoy Dory and her parents. I think some of my favorite scenes, not even just some of them, the best scenes in the movie were watching her talk to her parents, because I was really worried going into this movie. I knew it was something about Dory finding her parents, and that's, whatever, that's just the basis of the film. You know that going into it, probably, unless you literally look at nothing. You don't even look at a synopsis or the trailer or whatever. But, I like those scenes quite a bit. I was afraid, what I was going to say, is I was afraid that there was going to be some point of, because this is Pixar, and let's not forget, there's going to be some point of, let's really hit the viewer in the heart and just jab them, knife to the heart, and say something like, Dory's parents abandoned her or something. I was really worried we were going to see that, and luckily we didn't. We saw quite the opposite, actually. There was no abandonment, no shame for having a daughter with short-term memory loss or something like that. There could have been. They could have tried to work with that, and it wouldn't be the first type of movie to do that type of thing, but they didn't, and it was great. I really liked seeing her interact with her parents and how they were really patient and loving, and it wasn't even like they were treating her necessarily as if she was anything different. They treated her like she was her, and that's really the best thing a parent can do. Now, yeah, they have a daughter of a fish daughter. Is there a word for that? I guess it's just daughter at this point. But they have a daughter who has short-term memory loss. Yeah, and maybe not every fish out there, clearly not every fish or sea life creature animal has short-term memory loss, so you could consider her different in that way, but they didn't really treat her different. They just treated her what she needed to be treated as in terms of loving parents. They loved her, and they showed it in the best way they knew how, because of the best daughter they had for that situation. So I like that a lot. I really like the way they interact with her, and I like how they tried to help her with short-term memory loss. It wasn't just a thing that was kind of on the side. It was actually more of a topic than I expected it to be, in terms of when we had these flashbacks with Dory and her parents. I forgot their names. Something and Jennifer, right? It's like Kenneth or Kevin. I don't know. Is it a K? I really need to find out. Jeez. I think Jennifer was right, though, right? Anyway, I like that. That's one thing I want to say. Ooh, I can say this part now. The character I did not like as much, or had trouble with, was Marlon himself. because of how his character treated Dory's character, when his character really should have been above what he was saying to her. It was near the beginning of the movie when he said something like, Dory, why don't you just go over there and forget about it, because that's what you do best, right? I was like, whoa, his character is way above that. If the first movie did anything for his character, it was how to appreciate other people more and who they are. I mean, he even tried to, in the first movie, he said, Dory, I'm gonna go alone here now. You kind of slow me down, and I can't have someone try to slow me down, kind of thing, which was fair for what we were seeing, because we were seeing, their first interactions and their beginning journey as friends, and so I understand where they're going with on that one in the first movie, but here, this is after all that, so why are we bringing up this thing again of him not appreciating who Dory is and why she might be frustrating at times but is different? I couldn't get behind that, and I guess if the creators wanted me to say something to myself like that and be annoyed, then mission accomplished, but it almost threw me out of the movie in the wrong kind of way. I don't know if anybody else felt that way about it. I'm sure someone out there did, but that bugged me. In terms of other characters, because I mentioned I liked most of the main characters and the supporting characters were fine, I had trouble with those sea lions. I think they had names. I don't remember their names. And I apologize, because I like sea lions in real life. And don't forget 10 favorite animals over here. But what they did with them was... So there's the sea lions and that bird, Becky. And what they did with them was just so... It was like, okay, we get it. Like, can we give us something else, please? I guess with the sea lions, it was something about how this other sea lion named Gerard, was that his name? He kept trying to get up on their rock, and they're like, no, go away, our rock. And it was like, oh, okay, they want the rock for themselves or whatever. And then he kept trying to get back on the rock and did it again and again, and it's just like, okay, you don't need to overuse the same joke that only barely worked in the first place. And then they were friends with Becky the bird, which is cool. I like seeing this thing where it's like, oh yeah, I know that animal over there. I like the concept of having animal friends who aren't the same species of animal. It's kind of fun. So I liked having a character like Becky, but then Becky was like really weird, and they just showed her being really weird a lot, and it was like, okay, you don't need to keep showing her being weird, because it's hardly funny anyway, and if you keep trying to make it funny, it's just not going to work. That's that part of the humor thing that didn't work for me. So those characters, who were the characters that, that's the one with echolocation, and the one who was half blind or had trouble seeing? Destiny and Bailey, the beluga whale and the whale shark. That's who I mean. I liked them. I mostly liked the way they interact together. And in terms of interactions, I do want to say this. I'm glad that in the first movie and in Finding Dory, Finding Nemo, Finding Dory, I'm glad we see various types of fish, because it felt well connected to what we as humans recognize in interacting with humans. Sometimes they would run into mean fish, and they'd be like, just get out of my way, I don't want to talk to you, whatever. And sometimes they would run into really friendly fish. I think there was one in Finding Dory, God, it's hard to keep track, one in Finding Dory, where it was having a flashback of Dory trying to find help to find her parents, and there was the swordfish or something that said, you want to swim with us, kind of thing, like, well, we'll swim with you for a while. I think that's neat to have some fish out there who are really nice and want to help, and it's neat realistically to see fish who don't want to help, kind of thing. So I like that we have a good mixture. It's believable. It's relatable. I guess that's the most important part there. It's relatable to what we know as humans. And in terms of having characters like the one with the echolocation and the one who was mostly blind helping Dory, that was cool. Like, those are the kinds of characters that come into the movie for a bit to help our characters out, and sometimes they leave. And in this case, they came back in like 3 or 4 times, which goes to the repetitive thing I was talking about. But I at least like those characters. It was cool to have them have their own motivations and their own feelings, and see them interact with someone who's on this bigger, longer journey trying to figure things out. Hank the Octopus is a pretty cool character. I like how when we first see him as viewers, and for Dory, it's more about what he's trying to accomplish, and he wants to get out of the quarantine zone, so it's like, I need that tag, and I'm doing this more for me than for you. And as we go throughout the movie, we get to know him a little bit, we get to see him interact with Dory, and it's cool to know that by the end of the movie, his character has changed, even if he's a minor character. Again, though, I can think of, I think I remember multiple times in the movie where he would just show up out of nowhere and save Dory, or, help out all of a sudden, or did he even save Marlon and Nemo at some point? That's another thing that was, I think, a little bit more repetitive than it needed to be, but I liked his character and seeing him change at least a little bit, because those extra characters that change like that, that's what really helps complete a movie and make it fully flushed out, I guess you could say. I'm sure I'm among many people when I was thinking, Dorys' parents, please don't be dead, please don't be dead, please don't be dead, please don't be dead, because how sad would that be to see, especially with all the great flashbacks we had of Dory as a little girl, and loving her parents so much, and having such great, sweet, charming interactions with them. How tragic would it be to see all of that, and then find out that her parents, never made it out of quarantine zone, or ended up in a situation where they got eaten, or killed, or experimented on, or whatever. A lot of things were open there, and I'm glad that we got a lot of chances to think, to kind of predict to ourselves. That's one thing I enjoy doing with movies, is when something comes up, they want the viewer to think, okay, what's going on? I think this might make sense, and maybe that's it. It's those things where the viewer starts making predictions to themselves and trying to figure out what's going to happen, that you have a viewer totally engaged, and I was engaged. I was really trying to figure out. So now that we have this new clue, or this new lead, or this new possibility, what did happen to Dorys' parents? And it was for quite a while that we didn't really know. And so I'm glad we had that, but also I was totally scared that we were going to find out that something terrible had happened to them, and we would never find out what would happen again. And they could have done that. I mean, really, we see movies often where totally tragic things happen, and so many main characters out there have to lose their parents just to have that main character status. And in this case, we could have seen a movie where it was more about acceptance for things that have already happened, that we can't change even though they're sad. That very well could have been the route they took, and I wouldn't say I'm glad they didn't, because that can work as well, but I guess I am glad because I just like seeing her interact with her parents. So great stuff, especially with the fact that we had shells, and that was a good detail, the shell thing. Her mom saying, let's go get some shells. We can make a path of shells, or just use shells. Eventually became a route, the breadcrumb route to get Dory back home eventually. But I just like the fact that even if it wasn't a route back home, it was a thing of like, hey, let's go find some more shells. And I'm glad they didn't say it very explicitly. But they were trying to help her, practice memory skills. We're going to send you on a very simple task. Let's go get a shell. Dory turns around and starts going for the shell, and that's probably practice to her to realize, like, wait, what am I doing? Why am I getting the shell, kind of thing. Sort of like how they would do that kind of thing, but also how her mom would say something like, I like the purple ones the most. I mean, that gives the mom a little more personality. It gives them a little bit more of a connection, and the way she says it, as if it's supposed to be a secret or something, it's like a nice little thing for a mother and a daughter to have. It's like, oh, mom likes the purple ones, and it helps her appreciate her mom, what her mom's doing with her, as well as appreciate the fact that she has a good, strong connection with her family. I mean, just that stuff, for some reason, it just spoke to me. I guess they keep coming back to the fact that the parents and Dory just had such a cool thing going on together, but I like the shell thing. And since the shell aspect of the movie was subtle, when we eventually started seeing shells, I mean, Dory's kind of, really down. This is, of course, near the end of the movie, when your characters are at their low point. You often hear where it's more tragic, and if they get out of this, it's going to be really hard to get through. And I think that was the point when she was totally separated from Bailey and Destiny and Marlon and Nemo, and she started seeing shells and at the seashore. And the fact that she was able to remember that she should follow them to find her way back home, that was a great thing, because they didn't say, there was no line of dialogue or things spelled out that said, Dory has found shells. Don't you think she should use those to get home? It was a thing for the viewer to say, oh yeah, shells, right, of course. She should follow them. Go follow them. Dory, go, please. I want to see you follow them, or something. I think that worked. I like the fact that we got to see something that worked for characterization and interaction at the time, that also came back later and was totally believable for the importance of that. Seeing the reunification of Dory and her parents was pretty much everything I would hope that it would be. It was positive, it was nice, and it wasn't even the end. The interesting thing was, I guess, it wasn't the very end of the movie, right? Because then we have to find out how do we get Dory and her parents back together with Marlon and Nemo, because that was, we want, it's interesting, in this kind of movie, I guess we want the characters to be where they were when they started. They started together, but I guess also with the journey completed and the information found about where Dory's parents were, and hopefully they would be with Dory and Marlon and Nemo too. So we wanted them to get back together, and so we had quite a bit more of a few sequences of them attempting to do so, and a few parts in the last sequence of the movie with this truck. There was the truck going to, gosh, where was it going? Someplace in California? I'm having trouble with names on this one, but someplace in California. That's where Hank wanted to go, type of thing, but that's where Marlon and Nemo ended up in. That sequence was almost too... They tried almost too hard to make it like cinematic, I guess. I mean, having an octopus drive an 18-wheel truck with Dory trying to navigate and traffic everywhere and cars crashing, it was almost too much. I mean, at least in Toy Story, like, you know, similar to situation, we have an 18-wheeler truck and we got to get these characters reunited. It wasn't like the traffic became a huge part of it or the driving became a huge part of it. I mean, it was kind of just one straight shot, and it was more character based in terms of the characters in the truck still didn't trust Woody, and Woody was trying to prove to them that he was trustworthy and all those things. He wasn't lying the whole time. So that was at least character based when we did that. And with Hank and Dory just driving the truck, it was just like, hey, just get the truck to the sea. Like, we know what we're trying to do here. Watching them drive around in traffic a lot didn't really add much tension at all, other than because by the beginning of them driving around, we were like, okay, get back to the ocean. And it wasn't even that long, but just a couple minutes later, I was thinking, okay, well, we're still in the same spot. We want them to get to the ocean and reunite with Marlon, and Nemo. So by the end of the scene with the 18-wheeler truck and Hank and Dory were trying to navigate it back to the ocean and everything, we have the truck way in the air falling straight down into the ocean where Marlon and Nemo and Dory's parents are waiting, and it starts, you know, and then all of a sudden slow motion scene and everything's falling, and I think that's the part where they're playing the What a Wonderful World song, which is a fantastic song, but this is like one of the most important scenes in the movie because the whole time we, as the viewer, have been waiting to see Dory and her parents and Marlon and Nemo finally all be together at the same place at the same time. And we didn't get that yet. We had Dory and her parents a little bit. We had Dory's parents and Marlon and Nemo. And of course we have Dory and Marlon and Nemo. But we never had what we were finally going for the whole time, to be finally together. And so when it's the first possibility that it's finally going to happen, and all of this hard work and all of this long waiting and journeying and effort is finally going to pay off, they have like this weird, awkward, really strangely toned scene with the truck falling and playing the What a Wonderful World song. And I was just like, huh? Like, who wrote that part? I mean, why would they think that was the right time to do that? With such an important scene, I can't believe they had such an awkwardly, strangely out-of-place tone for it. And I don't even remember, I think it threw me so far out of the movie, I hardly even remember what happened after the truck fell in. I mean, I guess they were all together, right, or something? But, gosh, that one was really weird. So, I mean, the very end of the movie, great. I mean, like, you know, last few frames were great, but just that climax for the craziness going on, I mean, that's an important part of any movie, the climax right there, but it didn't work for me here. Maybe someone thought that was just totally hilarious and they were having a great time, and I'm not going to say that you shouldn't have. For me, I was really thrown out by the change of pace even. I mean, it was slow motion, so change of pace, the change of tone, and how it didn't really seem to value what the most valuable part of the movie was, which was getting these characters that we love, and especially love together, to finally have that great moment of, oh man, we made it. Now I call foul penalty on the rink, or what is it, flag on the court, or like the penalty. Someone has to go to the penalty square. Icon Sports. They very clearly show in Finding Nemo in the credits that the fish who were in the aquarium with Nemo in the dentist's office, there's like, you know, Peach the starfish, and oh gosh, what is this? So he, in the German version, he's Khan, like the leader fish who has the injured fin, and he's like the leader of the group. Is his name Khan in the English version too? He's the one who's voiced by Willem Dafoe. Oh my gosh. I need to watch this movie in English. So to me, he's Khan. I hope you know who I mean. But they put them in the little bags, and they escape into the ocean by the end of Finding Nemo. And in the credits, they show them very clearly have escaped, and they're swimming around in the ocean as they've always dreamed of. And then in Finding Dory, was it after the credits, we see them back in the bags again. And it's like, what? Pixar, I mean, what kind of inconsistency is that? I can't even believe you would do something so incredibly different and contradictory. And I gotta say, I'm losing all respect for you, because this is the internet, and I have to make the biggest case out of everything possible. I'm just kidding. I was just a minor inconsistency I thought was kind of goofy. I almost actually like that it's different, just because it's kind of like, who cares, why does it matter if they were still in the bags or not? It was just cool to see those characters again, just for a little glimpse, And they could have overused those characters. They actually could have brought back too many characters in Finding Dory, and I'm glad they didn't. They had the right amount of references and callbacks and flashbacks, especially for those moments of Marlon trying to figure out what he really felt about Dory, and Nemo trying to figure out how he respected his dad's opinion about things. So in terms of actually, callbacks and things like that, that was pretty good. And, like Crush, when Marlon said, we have to get to California, the coast of California, and he says, I know a guy, I was like, Crush, yeah. And it made sense why he would know a guy. It made sense how Crush would help them out, and they didn't overuse Crush. It was just pretty cool. It was like great, we have our friend, and off we go, to the next scene. And that's all we really needed. We don't need to have an entirely different movie, and we definitely don't need to have the exact same movie. So some of those elements really worked well in this case for Finding Dory, especially in comparison to Finding Nemo, and I appreciate that. Oh yeah. What is happening in movies? When I saw Jurassic World, the kids in that movie, who I hated those characters, and they're like in that cool kind of bubble thing, and they drive around in Dinosaur Land or whatever, and it's like the video comes on, it's like, I'm Jimmy Fallon. It's like, okay. And at the time I thought it was kind of funny, but then I realized, like, well, that's just weird. And so with the equivalent in this movie, even though it's not just the equivalent, it's like that times 14, was Sigourney Weaver. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Sigourney Weaver. Every single movie I've seen her in, from Holes to Galaxy Quest to Alien, they're great movies, and she does a fantastic job. But why does she need to be the announcer, like the intercom promoter, advertiser for this aquarium? It's like, what? It's just so weird. It's just really bizarre. So that's another part of humor these days I just don't really understand. Like, if we just get some really famous celebrity who's out of place and then put them into a spot, and it's like, haha, because it's out of place, and it's funny because it's out of place, right? I don't get it at all. If they did the joke maybe once, I would have appreciated it better. But the fact that I think I heard her say, "Hi, I'm Sigourney Weaver," like, it had to be at least 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and I was like, why? This is very bizarre and very weird. I'm sure some people out there found that to be the best part of the movie, and it's like, ha, Sigourney Weaver, ha, Sigourney Weaver. Wait, when's Sigourney Weaver coming back? But that's the type of joke that I think it's overused, and rather than being particularly clever, it's just doing it because it did it, and it's doing it again to do it and try to be funny. But that was a weird one. There's not a lot left I feel like I need to talk about for Finding Dory. One thing is coming to my mind about, suspension of disbelief. I mean, in Finding Nemo, we didn't have a lot to worry about in terms of make sure we have water. I mean, we have fish characters. We have, water-breathing fish characters. So we had the ocean, we had the aquarium tank, and very few instances where they had to make sure they had water. But in Finding Dory, there was a lot of stuff where it's just like, wow, they're so lucky they landed in that tank, because if they didn't, they'd just be on the ground. So there was a lot to work with in terms of make sure we're in the cup, or make sure we're in the was it like a coffee, what are those things called? Coffee? I don't drink coffee. Those things that hold coffee. Those things. A couple of tanks in the aquarium or the ocean itself. It was just like, I was almost like, geez, I would not be surprised if someone just like, okay, really? How did they land in that? I mean, they just had to get super lucky to land in that spot of water at that time. So it doesn't ruin the movie by any means, but it's the type of thing like that makes me feel like Finding Dory is a little bit less well written than Finding Nemo. And it's hard to say that because Finding Dory is a totally different movie with a totally different scenario and setting. So yeah, they had to find a way to get, to have our character moment in this point of the aquarium and in this point of the aquarium and in that point, different rooms, different buildings even. So it makes sense why they would have to do stuff like that. But when it throws people out of the movie or it challenges it has the suspension of disbelief thing going on, it just seems less well written. It's kind of like, rather than the viewer having to worry about the reality of the situation, they could just appreciate Finding Nemo, and we could still appreciate what's happening in Finding Dory. But when we have those moments or those things where they just make us almost stop, and some of us have to stop even more than others because that's how it affects us, it can be a little awkward. So a little awkwardness is okay, and it, again, doesn't ruin the movie, but I did want to point that out, how there's some things that just didn't flow nearly as well in Finding Dory as they did in Finding Nemo. But again, I think that's just because Finding Nemo was such a really lucky, perfect setup. And they knew what they wanted to do with the characters. That's another thing I often find myself saying. I really like a movie that knows what it wants to be. There is no point in Finding Nemo where you think, what was the point of that scene? Every scene adds character, adds challenges for the characters to go through, and it builds on each other. The fact that in Finding Nemo you have that really good, I love this montage, the montage where, I think it's the turtles who were telling some other sea life about what Marlon's done and how we got through the jellyfish fields with Dory, and how they're telling another type of fish and another type of fish, and they're telling the birds. It's like, cool, it's all building upon each other. And then when, oh gosh, what's his name in English? The pelican, his name is Nils in German, I think. Oh, Nigel the Pelican. I know it. When Nigel the Pelican ends up, hearing about it, and he comes back to the aquarium at the dentist's office where he hangs out. He passes the message to Nemo. That's just super awesome. I love that concept of it and how it just comes around full force and it's really fleshed out. And so it's good. I mean, but that's the thing. That is such a hard act to follow, especially when you're literally making an act of a Finding movie, trying to follow Finding Nemo. Gosh, that's hard to say. It's just difficult. Here's an interesting thought I'm having to myself, and I'm kind of asking myself to answer for the benefit of everybody, and I would want to ask everybody else as well too, but should there be a third Finding movie, like another sequel? We've had Finding Nemo, Dory, boom, should there be a third one? Should it be Found Dory, or Found Nemo, or Found Them, or something? I don't know what it would be, but should there be one? And I feel like I also want to ask myself and everybody else, should my answer or our answers be influenced by the fact that we have had maybe unexpected or just very late sequels? I mean, Incredibles 1 was 14 years ago, and now we have Incredibles 2. That's a long gap to have between a direct sequel and a prequel. What about Toy Story 1995? When did Toy Story 3 come out? 18 years later? So sure, but in reality, should I want a third one just for the sake of wanting a third one? Not unless there's a really particularly good reason or a good story or good motivation the creators have to make a third one that they can, through that movie, show. So if there is eventually another one, I'm going to be right there with everybody else watching it and, again, appreciating it. But if you were to ask me before this review, should there be a third Finding movie, I had honestly never thought of it until right now. But I do think my answer would be yes. I think that's everything for Finding Dory. I really can't think of anything else that I really want to say or that's come to mind that I haven't ever addressed yet. But I always worry that I'm going to totally forget something super important and not address it at all or not address it enough. So please, for one thing, I apologize. But please let me know in comments or in messages or in emails whether there's something I should address that I haven't addressed at all, or I should address it further, or anything like that. And but on that note, super thank you for watching the review. I really hope it's as much fun for everyone else to watch me talk about movies as much as it is for me to make reviews about movies. It's really a blast. I'm having a ball here. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I hope people would consider subscribing to it, just in case you want to see more things that I do, or hear more about what I have to say about movies, or Pixar and Disney in particular. I've been really into those lately. And the next one coming up, on that note, will be Incredibles 2. I'm thinking about doing a little video on Incredibles 1, just to kind of get myself in the right mindset and show where I'm coming from on that one. So then, when I see Incredibles 2 next month, it's going to be like, that's where I was, here here we are now, and bam! Incredibles 2. Let's love it. I'm hoping to like it. The trailer's interesting. I have seen the one trailer for it, and we'll see what happens. But I hope you're all excited for that as much as I am. And again, thank you for being here very much. I find now that I must go find Finding Dory because I found Finding Nemo. And again, the founders of Finding Nemo found it. Stop, just go. Get out of here. Just go.